Tyler.
Well, Matt and Steven, thank you for being here. It is truly an inspiring story. I think everybody feels that way. You wanted to talk about open sourcing data.
I do.
And I completely agree with you that there's a problem that if patients want to share, why can't they more easily? And certainly it's an empowering thing. But one of the reasons there's a hesitation relates to genetic data.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just yours, because you are the child of parents and the sibling of siblings. And your genes relate to their genes, and so you're telling something about them at the same time they're telling something about you. So as you think about it in those terms, does it give you pause, or is it just whatever goes?
Yep, that's the one area that it does give me pause. I've thought about this a lot and had a lot of discussions, and the fact that it's not only your data but your family's data is something to consider. I completely agree on that. That being said, I'm a fan of having more data than less data, and your personal being is your personal property, so you have the right to share that data if you'd like to. I do agree that it should be an involved discussion to have with that family. I think there's been an amazing first step with the Personal Genome Project, and as far as I know, it's very difficult to misuse that genetic data. I know there are discrimination laws against it, and it could end up having a very positive effect if they find something. So I do agree there is a lot of sensitivity needed there, especially because of the family links.
So maybe I can follow up a little bit on Howard's question, but thank you so much for coming. What is your family's experience with cancer? What was the reaction of your family to the events that took place?
Sure. So there's not really a history of cancer in my family. So as Matt talked about the science, this is likely not a genetic cancer at all in terms of being passed on. They were very, very supportive of all of the amazing capabilities that MIT and Harvard were able to provide. They actually very much enjoyed the data, and I spoke here 3 weeks ago and I posted that talk on my Facebook page, and it was the craziest reaction I've ever seen on Facebook for myself. I probably got hundreds of messages overnight. People that saw that video that I don't even know from around the world send me emails saying thank you for sharing. And it's connected me to more doctors, believe it or not. I've actually gotten more opinions and more links to actually find better treatment through that. So my family's been incredibly supportive and positive throughout that. But I do completely agree that this cancer can be a very cultural thing as well. There are many communities that saying the word cancer is a bad thing to do, and I totally agree that the privacy is the number one important thing, and that patients should have the choice to share or not to share.
With the different patients that you've interacted with, do you find that most people are open to this open data idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was actually a patient recovery conference a little while ago for people that have had brain surgery, and literally every person I talked to was very open to share and wanted to share. And it could also be that if you look at the more lethal diseases, people want to share more because they just want to help people. If their data can be useful, a lot of the people I spoke to don't even care if their name's associated with it. They don't even want to be anonymous. And that could just be because these are very lethal diseases. But I do feel that even if you get a small subset of the population that wants to share, it would make a huge difference.
So I'd like to reiterate my thanks for coming and sharing. I'm curious about the diagnosis of being IDH-MUT, because that must have been a huge relief, and I'm wondering if you knew that before you went into the surgery or only after the surgery, and whether it's changed your or influenced your decision about the chemo and the proton
Sure.
therapy treatment.
Yeah, it's definitely, so the type of tumor that I have, the IDH1, is a favorable mutation to have for a glioma. I have a grade 2 tumor with 2 areas that are grade 3-like. So my treatment is radiation and chemo, and parts will be for a grade 3 level. We did have a very strong feeling that it was an IDH1 mutation before the surgery, and that was from the 2HG mapping that Dr. Andronesi at MGH was able to provide. So, of course, no doctor is ever going to tell you, yes, this is what it is, until you have the biopsy, but they were saying, we're 95% sure this is an IDH1 mutation. So definitely it helped to be able to plan that course of action. It was literally 2 or 3 weeks of scans to figure out how they're going to cut this out.
I can just speak to that briefly, that thus far the experience both at MGH and in Texas, which are the 2 places that have done the biggest series of this, they have yet to find a 2HG positive tumor in either location that has not been IDH mutant. So at least in terms of like predictive power, it's actually been pretty amazing.
So again, thinking about IDH.
Yeah.
So you know that your tumor had that mutation.
Yep.
You know that there are drugs that are being developed to target that mutation.
Yep.
Those drugs are in clinical trials, and I'm
Yep.
guessing that there are parameters related to those clinical trials that you're probably excluded, that exclude you, or no?
No.
So talk about how you will approach the access to those drugs.
Yeah, so that's a very personal question, and it's a real decision to make, because there have been clinical trials offered to me to do experimental drugs. I'm definitely keeping them on the table, and I'm very aware of the studies and the data. Currently, I'm going to hold off on the experimental. A lot of them are in phase 1 trials. I'm going to wait until after the chemo and radiation, but there's been a number of options put on the table for me, which has been incredible, and it's a very gray area. So you have to think a lot about unintended side effects versus, right now the tumor is likely the smallest it's going to be in my brain, so it's potentially the best time to use those drugs. So there is definitely a balance there. You can also look at the difference between protons and X-rays, and that's another question. For me, we ended up doing the protons as the tumor is very close to the optical nerve, and they're very worried about mutagenesis of the optical nerve. So again, there's pluses and minuses all over, and it makes it very difficult to choose as a patient, and this is why the data is so important. This is why the work that you guys do is so important.
Nancy. Wait 1 second for the microphones.
Thank you so much. I heard you the other night, and I have come back again to hear you again. It's just
Thank
an
you.
incredible story. I was curious about, based on what we know now, suppose in 2007 or 10, they had thought to test in some way. Would it have made any difference? What could they have done? What would they do today? How does it affect how people think about these abnormalities we all have?
Right. Matt might have a better answer for you. From my lens, so the IDH1 and the human genome thing wasn't really done until 2008, so they didn't actually know about that in 2007.
Which is incredible, by the way.
Yeah, it's a very fast progression of science. So I definitely don't hold it against anyone. I'm very happy that they found it. My neurosurgeon did say that in 2010, had he known what he knows today, he would have taken it out then. But that's having known what he knows today, which is 4 years later. So that's not really a fair point to look back on that.
Change the way they analyze these tumors in early stages?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think probably the biggest difference between now and then is that with this, you know a lot more about what the time horizons are, that this is a favorable prognosis thing, and so maybe that plays into the clinical care. I think it's a rapidly evolving area. I think I would like to say that if someone found an abnormality like that, they might take advantage of the latest technology and look. I mean, had they had the ability, had they known what they know today, scan was done in the right place, would they have put him on a research scan? Because it would have been research. Nothing about looking for 2HG is standard of care by any stretch of the imagination. So there's at least, if the right place at the right time, you may have gotten a research scan, see it's 2HG positive, that probably would have pushed someone to do something if that was known today relative to what they knew at the time. And I can say that it's like, this is actually a very, as a clinician, I can speak to this because there's a lot of issues that as scientists, we may not always appreciate. I think we always focus on what is the therapy that we can do to help, and we don't always think about all therapies have side effects, and that the side effects are real drivers in clinical decision making, particularly when you're talking about experimental therapies, because things can look fantastic, great trials in leukemia, but none of that really matters, right? You will experience the side effects as well as you'll experience the benefits, and those are real decisions to make. And I think the other part is, like you said, what you know today, of course you would have taken it out, 7 years ago, but if we all went around and did scans, we would find stuff, and it's not clear what needs to be acted on or not, and then you experience the side effects of what is acted on. And so it really underscores, I think, the power of actually learning what the science is behind what's going on. I think we can say, I think we would approach that scan, the scan you had in 2007, very differently today if you were in the right place doing the right research than they did at the time. And that, I guess, is the power of research, because more data, it could have changed what they did. So by NMR Spectroscopy, so the way that test was developed, so it's, again, there's a little bit of competing technologies right now. This really gets into the very high level discussion of NMR physics and what the best way to actually do the test is, because there's actually 3 different ways out there. UCSF has a sort of way they do it, Texas has a way they do it, and then MGH has a way they do it. As far as I can tell from my level of understanding, they all work pretty similarly, and I think they're all designed to work on sort of clinical grade 3 Tesla scanners that are available in every single hospital. NMR spectroscopy is not a new thing. It's actually done in some clinical settings even now, and there's research on this that dates back a very long time. So there was some sort of physics tricks were required in order to resolve 2-HG from other, glutamate and things like that, some other very abundant things that are present also in these MR spectra. But as far as I can tell, those problems are solved, and you don't need research scanners to do it. You can do it on clinical scanners. So the barriers to bringing this forward are not high, but it still requires, the studies need to be done to know, because I think you've got to bear in mind that while the experience has been good so far, it's very limited, and to really be applicable to lots of people, you need to know more.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. One of the things that really stayed with me among all the amazing things that we heard today is how you're able to look perfectly normal without this huge tumor.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And,
I agree.
And so, obviously, I didn't know you before, but I was wondering if, since 2010, as your tumor started expanding, did the brain just remodel around to conserve its capacity or who you were, or did you gradually change? And that's why you didn't see it. And so, you or your family noticed, and I guess it's really hard to say, because it's happened in 40 years of your life, also you do change a lot of personality, but did you notice any changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So did I notice any changes throughout the tumor growth? And no, I did not myself at all. My family did not. After the surgery, no one has noticed a difference in me, my girlfriend and my family. The only person that's noticed a difference, that has seen a difference, is myself. And that is, 1, in the sleep, like I said, and 2, it's in trusting your own brain. So the very fact that I found this tumor because of a very, very slight smell for 30 seconds a day makes every time my arm falls asleep or I get a weird feeling in my leg, I'm wondering, is that another seizure? So, that I've noticed differences in myself. I have not heard from anyone else that they've noticed differences in me. It's a very interesting question how the brain can remodel throughout the time of that tumor growth. Unfortunately, I don't have any personal data to back that up.
I think that this thing of waking up with, just a sort of unhandleable amount of ideas or thoughts is a result of restructuring of sort of different, memory pathways or whatever?
Yeah, I'm not definitely qualified to answer that. Definitely there's a lot of better brain researchers that could give a more scientific answer. In general, that effect is decreasing. I can tell you that from my own experience. It was the worst right after the surgery. I would almost wake up in a cold sweat because I had too many ideas and I just couldn't stop thinking. I had to go take a shower just so that my brain would calm down. Now it is getting better. So it very well could be new connections that are formed. I don't have the scientific background to dive into that.
Can I ask, is that something your physicians told you to expect?
No, but after going to that patient conference, it seemed almost everyone in the room that had gone through brain surgery had some sleep issues.
Interesting.
So back to the open sourcing issue. First of all, I agree that patients and also research subjects should have control over their knowledge about what comes out. And I'm wondering, you must now have talked to many physicians and clinicians. What is what's the barrier? Is it just getting the information to people, or are they also reticent about having to give them enough information so that they can understand the ethical issues?
Right. So I've definitely been talking to doctors about this, and I'm just starting this path, so I've got a bunch more meetings in the next few weeks, which is very exciting. All the doctors that I've worked with have been very open. It's been incredible. Even the research studies have given me all the data. It's just they don't usually get asked for it. So it really, to me, seems as though this will happen in time. There are definitely some legal issues. There's HIPAA and a few other things. But as long as the patient is fully in agreement, it should be able to be done. And I think, one, it's a technical issue. So right now, hospitals use CDs for everything, and not even all hospitals are connected. So if I get a scan at Mount Auburn, I have to go over and pick up a CD to carry it to another hospital. So I really think Brigham and MGH are definitely leading the way. I can log in online and see some of the basic data, blood work and things like that. But for the MRI scans and the more in-depth scans, I have to go to the hospital, and it's a special recommendation to get that. So everyone seems to be interested in doing this, but there's these certain legal issues and there's a privacy concern. So I do think it will happen, and I really hope that it's patient-driven, because the current open source models are for scientists. So if you want to go to Personal Genome Project or Synapse or Sage Bionetworks, it's great as a scientist, you can get all the data, but there's no way for patients to understand that data. So I'm imagining in the future it'll be like a Facebook type thing where if you have a brain tumor, you want to explore your brain, you can go in like a magic school bus through your brain, and you can press a button that says print my tumor, and it'll arrive at your house. Or you could, if patients can understand how drugs work, they're more likely to do the drugs. So and if the effects will be able to be measured and quantified even by our smartphones and things like that. So I think it's going that direction. I just really hope that it is open source and it's not closed source and monetized. That's what I hope.
I can just say, from the physician's perspective, there is there needs to be a cultural change. Because the default culture in the hospital is protection, and there's a tremendous amount. You have no idea. I mean, I have a very limited clinic, and you have no idea the amount of hoops and stuff I have to jump through because they're so worried that someone's going to hack and get access to patient data. That the fear from the hospital is that the data will get out. So you have to. While they are open to sharing it if you request it, the default is the fear that people will find it.
And Brigham is doing some interesting things. They just started Biobank, which is kind of a more open source model, but it's still siloed within Brigham. So there are steps being made towards that for sure. But I agree, even just to get some of the open data that I've gotten, I have to go through some interesting loopholes.
Where is your tumor now, and how hard was it to get to the place that you wanted it to go?
It was very easy. So it's currently held in the biobank at Brigham. And because it's such a large tumor, there's lots of extra mass. So if we want to use it for any other genetic tests, it's open for the scientists at Brigham to do that. It was fairly an easy process, actually. They take all the tumors as long as people sign them off to do exome sequencing and things like that. And they actually have a standard of care, sequencing and mouse models, which is pretty interesting too.
One more question?
Well, I can speak loud enough. I think part of the problem for the open source reticence for people, in my vision, it came from the past where your insurance, no one wanted to know anything. You wouldn't want anyone to know about anything because you would not be able to get insurance if you had a pre-existing condition. And this is something that I think we're going to have to really overcome in order for people to be more willing to share their information. And that's something that's going to have to take precedence, because there's a lot of reticence to actually letting people know what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really big issue. That it's basically an insurance thing from my point of view.
That's definitely true. There's a lot of interest, though, that would come from insurance companies because they could actually save money by treating ailments earlier as well. I think this is totally going to happen, and there are laws in place for genetic discrimination for insurance companies. More data is just going to be produced over time. I mean, you can tell in the last 10 years the amount of data that the world generates is skyrocketing. And it's going to happen with healthcare data being our smartphones and watches. And I think it could save insurance companies a lot of money if they're able to, identify these things sooner.
Well, that's part of the pre-existing culture that we were speaking of.
Yeah.
It's hard to get over that in people's minds.
It's a very valid point, absolutely. And again, it doesn't need to be everyone that's doing this. It just needs to be a small subset of the patients that want to share their data should be able to. So they could be taking those risks, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and most importantly, thanks, Steven.